Hello, this is Timothy Duke, and this is the second video of a series to make a video recording of an ebook. And that ebook is about rapture. And the title of the book is No Rapture, Pre-Tribulation, Mid-Tribulation, or Post-Tribulation. And it's available at lulu.com, Lulu.com. And the next step would be to just search for my name, Timothy Duke, and you'd be able to find all the books that I've read or written and download those that you would like, including this one. Now, the next stage we're in is in the book itself. And of course, the title is No Rapture. And we get into the chapters, and we're ready for the next chapter, which is the definition of rapture. And because it's hyperlinked, you can just go directly to that chapter. And the definition of rapture is the belief or non-belief in a rapture, raptus, translation, caught up, taken up, harpazo, and is not an issue concerning salvation. If there is a translation or rapture, God will take any of us that he wants, when he wants, just as Jesus was taken up in Acts chapter 1, verse 9. And that verse is, and when he had spoken these things, while they beheld, he was taken up, and a cloud received him out of their sight. And while they stood steadfastly toward heaven as he went up, behold, two men stood by them in white apparel, which also said, Ye men of Galilee, why stand ye gazing up into the heaven? The same Jesus, which is taken up from you into the heaven, shall so come in like manner as ye have seen him go into heaven. And the Bible lists people that are not translated or took or caught up. One of the things that's interesting is look at the verbiage of took or caught up. That means that the person really does not have a choice. God makes the choice, and you're the recipient. The 144,000 that are sealed in Revelation 7 are not taken. I'll add commentary to the 144,000 sealed later, as I think many more people are actually sealed. I think they somehow make it to the New Jerusalem in Revelation 21, verse 27. But in Revelation chapter 7, verse 3, saying, Hurt not the earth, neither the sea, nor the trees, though we have sealed the servants of our God in their foreheads. I heard the number of them that were sealed, and there were sealed 144,000 of all the tribes of the children of Israel. The translations or raptures defined in the Bible do not give the person the option not to be translated, or raptured, or caught up, or took, if God decides to take a person like he did with Enoch. In Genesis 5, verse 24, and Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. In Hebrews 11:5, by faith Enoch was translated that he should not see death, and was not found, because God had translated him. For before his translation he had this testimony, that he pleased God. In Genesis 5:24 and Hebrews 11:5, equate God took him with God had translated him. Elijah did not seem to have a choice either, as he was taken up by a whirlwind. And it came to pass in 2 Kings chapter 2, verse 11, reads, And it came to pass, as they still went on and talked, that behold, there appeared a chariot of fire and horses of fire, and parted them both asunder. And Elijah went up by whirlwind into heaven. Moses was asleep, or dead, when he was taken. Archangel Michael fought Satan over Moses' remains or body. Perhaps that explains why Jesus spent some time in hell after he was crucified and freed saints that were there. Perhaps Satan had taken the bodies of those saints after they had died. The remains of a person must be important in being able to go to heaven. In Jude 9, Jude only has one chapter, so this is verse 9. Yet Michael, the archangel, when contending with the devil, he disputed about the body of Moses, durst not bring against him a railing accusation, but said, The Lord rebuke thee. When Jesus was crucified, the resurrected saints in Jerusalem were caught up, according to Nicodemus. In Nicodemus' contemporary non-canonical historical book, he writes a multitude of saints were risen when Jesus died on the cross and later were raptured with Jesus. Perhaps all saints that had died, fallen asleep, were risen, or just the saints that were alive and heard Jesus before falling asleep. The event was written by Matthew without telling us the number of saints or who they were. Matthew does not tell us what happened to those saints. Luke writes in Acts 1:10 that two men appeared in white apparel when Jesus was taken up. Perhaps these two men were some of the saints that had just risen when Jesus was crucified. Perhaps these two men were Elijah and Moses, as they wore white garments, as in Luke 9:28-32. We do not know from the scriptures. But Matthew chapter 27, verses 52 and 53, and the graves were opened, and many bodies of the saints which slept arose, and came out of the graves after his resurrection, and went into the holy city, and appeared unto many. Peter tells us that Jesus was put to death on the cross, and then went to hell, or purgatory, or prison, to save souls before his resurrection 3 days later. Perhaps those saved may be the saints that were resurrected in Matthew 27, verse 52. In 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 18, For Christ also hath once suffered for sins, the just for the unjust, that he might bring us to God, being put to death in the flesh, but quickened by the Spirit, by which he went and preached unto the spirits in prison. John writes about Lazarus' resurrection. In John chapter 11, verse 43, And when he had thus had spoken, he cried with a loud voice, Lazarus, come forth. And he that was dead came forth, bound hand and foot with grave clothes, and his face was bound about with a napkin. Jesus saith unto them, Loose him and let him go. Lazarus appears in Abraham's bosom in Luke 16. Did Jesus awaken Lazarus from Abraham's bosom, or did Lazarus go there later, or was Lazarus one of the saints that rose when Jesus died on the cross, or was Lazarus in Abraham's bosom when God called him to judgment during the great white throne judgment in Revelation 20, verse 12? Many questions, many possibilities. Luke 16, verse 22, And it came to pass that the beggar died, and was carried by the angels into Abraham's bosom. The rich man also died, and was buried. And in hell he lift up his eyes, being in torments, and seeth Abraham far off, and lays Lazarus in his bosom. In the great white throne judgment, in Revelation chapter 20, verse 11, And I saw a great white throne, and him that sat on it, from whose face the earth and the heaven fled away. There was found no place for them. And I saw the dead, small and great, stand before God, and the books were opened. Another book was opened, which is the book of life. and the dead were judged out of those things which were written in the books, according to their works. And the sea gave up the dead which were in it, and death and hell delivered up the dead which were in them, and they were judged every man according to their works. Did some or all of these saints in Matthew 27, verse 52, die, fall asleep before Jesus was teaching, or had they fallen asleep thousands of years prior to Jesus being crucified? A puzzling thought occurs about the saints. They arose from their graves when Jesus was crucified, and 3 days later were resurrected when Jesus was resurrected. Did they remain in their graves awake for 3 days? If they remained in their graves, then only God would know that they were awake or alive. One more proof that Matthew was just a stenographer for God, as Matthew could not have known they were awake, but not resurrected. In Matthew 27, verse 50, Jesus, when he had cried again with a loud voice, yielded up the ghost. And behold, the veil of the temple was rent in twain from the top to the bottom, and the earth did quake, and the rocks rent, and the graves were opened, and many bodies of saints which slept arose, and came out of the graves after his resurrection, and went into the holy city, and appeared unto many. So here is where the saints came alive when Jesus was crucified, and then after his resurrection, they appeared in the city. We do not know what happened to these saints from the Bible. Nicodemus did write a contemporaneous history book that states all saints in hell rose that day, and implies that they were raptured when Jesus was raptured. He and Joseph buried Jesus. In John 19, verse 38, and after this Joseph of Arimathea, being a disciple of Jesus, but secretly for fear of the Jews, besought Pilate that he might take away the body of Jesus. And Pilate gave him leave. He also therefore and took the body of Jesus. And there came also Nicodemus, which at first came to Jesus by night, and brought a mixture of myrrh and aloes, and about 100-pound weight. Then they took the body of Jesus and wound it in linen clothes with the spices, as the manner of Jews is to bury. Many people have strongly held views on rapture. They also differ as to whether the Bible is basically allegorical or is basically literal. People that believe the Bible is mostly allegorical normally believe in no rapture until the great white throne judgment. Those who believe the Bible is more literal or very literal believe in a rapture before the great white throne judgment in Revelation 20. The largest Christian church is the Catholic denomination with over 1.3 billion members around the world. Their doctrine is no rapture, and the Bible is very allegorical. Some believe that raptures did occur before Jesus was crucified and raptured, but no other raptures will occur until the great white throne judgment. The first question we need to answer is, what is rapture? I consulted the online dictionary for the definition and the origin of the word. You can click on this link to see the entire description, as I have excerpted a portion below. From Merriam-Webster, defines rapture as 1. An expression or manifestation of ecstasy or passion. 2a. A state or experience of being carried away by overwhelming emotion. Or B. A mystical experience in which the spirit is exalted to a knowledge of divine things. 3. Often capitalized, the final assumption of Christians into heaven during the end time according to Christian theology. Rapture is a verb, and it also is raptured and rapturing. And the definition of rapture is the second entry of 2. The transitive verb is in rapture. The first known use of rapture as a noun was in 1594 in the meaning defined as since one. The verb was first used in 1637 in the meaning defined above. The history and etymology for rapture, they list the noun in Latin as raptus. So it's interesting the Latin Bible was written about 300 AD. You have to remember that as the empires became dominant of the world for certain periods of time, they instructed the entire world to use their language as the language of all the world. And so the Hebrew Bible was first translated into Greek when the Greeks were dominant in the world. And then the Romans' language was Latin. And they were dominant in the world for many, many hundreds of years. And so the Romans had the Bible translated into Latin, which is called the Vulgate, around 300 AD. So the Webster Dictionary is referencing 1594 and 1637 as the first use. It really was used first about 1200 years before that, in 300 AD, during the Vulgate translation of the Hebrew and Greek Bibles into the Vulgate. So some of the things that you read in secular sources sometimes fudge certain things or are not really correct. Now, Revelation 12, verse 5, in Latin is et propiet filium masculinum qui rectoris erat omnis gentes invigra viria et raptus est filius ius et diem et ad thorm ius. You'll have to forgive me, it's been many years since I've taken Latin, but this is from the Vulgate Bible that you can download from or have as one of the Bibles that you have in your eSword collection. And so what I did was simply look at where Rapture, search the Vulgate to see where Rapture or Raptus was listed, and it came out to be Revelation 12:5. So you can go to Revelation 12:5 and see the relationship between Raptus as they defined it in the Vulgate and in English. But I believe in using the Bible to interpret the Bible and use the secular books like the dictionary to understand the secular view and perhaps some additional detail. I use Enoch as an example. In Genesis 5, verse 24, we read that God took Enoch. Genesis 5:24 states, and Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. The use of the word took implies that Enoch did not have a choice. Then, when reading a more descriptive view of Enoch's rapture in Hebrew 11, verse 5, the rapture is a transfiguration or translation. And I understand this phrase to mean that Enoch was taken and given his heavenly body. And Hebrews 11, verse 5 states, by faith Enoch was translated that he should not see death, and he was not, because God had translated him. For before his translation, he had this testimony that he pleased God. Using an English Bible, I think the definition of rapture is represented by the synonyms: translated, translation, caught up, taken up, and took. Comparing the Bible with my secular definitions, they have extracted the root meanings and stripped the definition of any Christian spirituality and made a bland reference to mystical. At last, when they do reference Christian spirituality, they state only one rapture in the end days, disregarding any other time period like those which Enoch, Elijah, and Moses, the saints when Jesus was crucified, and Jesus. Secularists certainly avoid a reference to becoming a hyperdimensional being, which means more than three dimensions, like we're familiar with, like Elijah and Moses appearing at the Mount of Transfiguration, as stated in Luke 9, verses 28 through 36. The KJV states Elias instead of Elijah in Luke 9. Translators from one language to another use a technique called transliteration to make a noun or name readable and pronounceable in the translated language. The original Hebrew text or Old Testament writing of Elijah is the Jewish letters that I have listed in the book. Since I do not read Hebrew, I have no idea what those Hebrew letters or the words sounds like or pronounced in English. The original Hebrew text for Elijah was transliterated, sounds to English is Elijah in the Old Testament in Kings 1 and 2. The New Testament was written in Greek. The original Greek text in Luke 9 for the Hebrew name Elijah is the same Jewish name, but was a much different name spelling in Greek. And the Greek name translated and transliterated to English was decided to be Elias. Fortunately, Strong's Concordance does the work for us and cross-references those names in the Old and New Testaments, as in H452 and G2243. Strong's Greek G2243 lists Elijah as acceptable translation to English for that same word that was translated, same word in Greek that was translated along with Elias. In the Transfiguration, Luke 9, verse 28, and it came to pass about 8 days after these sayings, he took Peter and John and James and went up into a mountain to pray. And as he prayed, the fashion of his countenance was altered, and his raiment was white and glistening. And behold, there talked with him two men, which were Moses and Elias, who appeared in glory and spake of his decease, which he should accomplish at Jerusalem. But Peter and they that were with him were heavy with sleep. And when they were awake, they saw his glory and the two men that stood with him. And it came to pass, as they departed from him, Peter said unto Jesus, Master, it is good for us to be here, and let us make 3 tabernacles, one for thee, one for Moses, and one for Elias, not knowing what he said. While he thus spake, there came a cloud and overshadowed them, and they feared as they entered into the cloud. And there came a voice out of the cloud, saying, This is my beloved Son, hear him. And when the voice was past, Jesus was found alone, and they kept it close, and told no man in those days of any of those things which they had seen. Peter, John, and James would not have known what Moses or Elijah looked like, yet they recognized them without introduction. And Peter stated, not knowing what he said. A person's heavenly body or transfigurated body may resemble your earthly body. It is a possibility that Peter, John, and James might have recognized Moses and Elijah from 1,000-plus-year-old paintings of their images. I lean towards another explanation. Perhaps your transfigured body gives you additional abilities like telepathic communication. So Moses and Elijah told Peter, John, and James their names and information about themselves telepathically. Since Peter said he did not know what he said, verse 33 is not knowing what he said, Perhaps Peter, Moses, and Elijah did not speak audibly. Perhaps Peter did not understand that they were communicating telepathically. If you lived 2,000 years ago, would you know what telepathy means? Perhaps they were speaking in tongues, and Peter could not say the words that were spoken, but understood what the words meant. So there's several possibilities. Jesus told us in the book of Revelation that translations, raptures will occur. Revelation 3, verses 1 through 6, captures Jesus' thoughts concerning the church of Sardis. Specifically in verse 5, Jesus tells us overcoming members of the church of Sardis will be raptured and given a white robe indicating they are saints. We know the members of Sardis church are in heaven because the verse says, his name, his angels, with a lowercase h, indicating a person and not God. We do not know when the rapture occurs. So Revelation 3 verse 5 states, he that overcometh, the same shall be clothed in white raiment, and I will not blot out his name out of the book of life, but I will confess his name before my Father and before his angels. I conclude secular references and non-canonical, or books not included in the Bible. Books can be useful secondary sources that may add color or additional information that is not contrary to the Bible. The best lies are 90% truth, so use your discernment to separate the Timberson plus from the falsehood. And that concludes this chapter. The next chapter starts off, is the term rapture in the Bible?